Good morning again, everybody. I trust that at least some of you were with us during the first message at 9 o'clock, but this is completely different stuff. Now, the video you're seeing on the screen right now is just a little video. It tells you a little about our ministry. Some of you have heard me before, some of you had not. This is our 37th year of full-time apologetics and discernment ministry. By apologetics, doesn't mean I'm sorry for something. You know, people say, what are you sorry about? Apologetics. Are you apologizing? No, apologetics is defense of the faith. In fact, the actual dictionary definition is that you give an ample defense of the faith. I'm reminded of a pastor friend of mine in Southern California, a guy that I've known a long time. He actually pastored Melanie and I up in Bellingham when we lived in Bellingham, Washington, back in the mid-'80s. But he, out of the blue, a few years ago, sent me a letter, and I received this letter, and it was in a large, I think it was like a 9x12 envelope, and what's in there? And I opened it up. It's a piece of cardboard backing a letter, so it wasn't folded. And it was just a letter about what he thinks about our ministry and recommendation letter type thing. And I was just blessed. I sat there just kind of, well, not flabbergasted because we have great respect for each other, but that he would take that opportunity to write that kind of a letter. And the next day, I got another one in the mail. And the next one, packaged the same way, as I remember correctly. When I opened it up and I began to read it, it said, to whom it may concern, Eric Barger is the greatest apologizer I know. And if you need something apologized for, bring him to your community and take him around town, and he'll do a good job. And I had to call him Pastor Bob Ford, is who I'm talking about. And I called him and said, so Bob, which letter should I use? You know, we had that kind of relationship, but we've had a long-term relationship, and one I'm very grateful for throughout all these years. He's still pastoring and holding forth the Word of God, actually in Salinas, not really Southern California, but that's where he is. But we've been doing this a long time, dealing with spiritual warfare, dealing with the cults and the occult and Bible prophecy, current events. And we're going to do those latter two here in this message in just a few minutes. If you want to get more information about the ministry, or you want to go and read some of the materials we produced, or watch videos or radio clips from radio shows I've been involved with, you'll find all that documented there at our website, ericbarger.com. And I hope you'll take opportunity to look at the website and use it. You'll also find me on Facebook and Twitter. I don't spend a whole lot of time there. I don't use Facebook as a social media type thing where I'm just discussing things with people, or, you know, trying to be personable, if you will. I really don't have time is the problem. But Facebook and Twitter are great means of ministry, and I use them that way. We began to develop TV ministry about 4 years ago, and I'm not on any of the channels or networks, not intending to be, but I use this to be able to reach people in places where I couldn't go and where the ministry will never be seen live and in person. By the way, I'm grateful to be live and in person here at Cornerstone Bible Church this morning, Lake Stevens, Washington, and people I've come to know and love and respect. And we began to put a conference together here at the church. Dr. David Reagan, Billy Crone, and myself, and Pastor Kerry Green, that you heard a few minutes ago, would have been the speakers just 3 weeks ago now. And, of course, that conference didn't happen. We had to cancel it. But we'll put that back on the schedule at some point, probably next year. And we hope that you'll be able to come and participate and take it in person. Would have been a great conference, and we were so looking forward to it, but didn't happen. But the TV ministry is a way to reach out to people that we can't see in person, but yet we can talk to them personally. At least I hope we can. That's what I'm trying to do. And I'm just me when I stand up here. There's no airs when I stand up. It's not anything except what you see is what you get, and that's what we try to give out in the TV ministry as well. And you'll see a little clip of that later on as part of the ministry this morning. You'll find us on YouTube, lots of videos there and more coming. We're going to put a couple of clips up on YouTube in the next 2 or 3 weeks that will come from different sections of the home invasion video, that documentary that I'm working on. Started out to be, an hour and a half maybe, and now it's 5 hours. But continuing to work on that, as well as the current events stuff that I'm working on today. You probably have heard me at some point in time with Jan Markell on her radio program She is heard on over 850 stations across the U.S. and around the world. And, of course, internet, we can't really track it, nor can we track how many of the podcasts go out, but probably that's the biggest audience. I'm just grateful for the opportunity that we've had to share what God's given me through her ministry, and she's been a great friend, and glad to be able to sit in for her occasionally and help co-host as well. We do an email update newsletter. Don't do a print newsletter very much. We're planning on doing a couple of them, at least we were until all this took place with COVID-19, a couple of them this year, but we're doing email updates about every week now, maybe every other week. And not trying to flood your email inbox, but I hope that you'll go to our website and sign up for it. You'll see very clearly spots marked on the website or buttons where you can click and then be able to sign up for the newsletter. And we're not going to bug you. We're never going to sell your name to somebody else's mailing list. We're not going to market you to somebody else. I don't like it when that happens, and so I hope that you'll go and get our material and be able to let us communicate with you. Also, our online store is important. It's a great way for you to support our ministry. I said to somebody the other day, I said, here we are a traveling ministry and we're not able to travel. So this has been our main focus and really our main form of income as well for the ministry and for our family by me going out and speaking at conferences and churches. But right now, all of that is put aside. And so the great way for you to support us is to go and take avail of some of the products in the bookstore that we have online at Eric Barger, again, ericbarger.com. So let's get into this. Now, in the first time together, the first service this morning, first session, I should say, at 9 o'clock, I talked about beyond COVID-19, about our response and how we can respond in the days ahead. And for us to take time now to look at our situation and see how we did when COVID-19 happened and when the shutdown took place, because it came on us pretty fast. And how did we do with that? And so you'll be able to see what we did this morning, as well as look at what I did in our TV studio, and it's already up on our YouTube site. But what I did this morning at 9 o'clock will be archived on the church's YouTube site or channel. And that, of course, is Cornerstone Bible Church. Cornerstone Bible Church, Lake Stevens, Washington. And you'll be able to see what I did at 9 o'clock in case you weren't with us at that point. And also what we're going to do in this particular service, you'll be able to look at it once it's archived. And that'll be very shortly, I'm told, today. So we'll see. But I laid out a framework of ideas for Christians, what we can do to deal with not just the coronavirus pandemic, but to be able to think about what we're going to do in these end times, these perilous times, what we'll do to be able to further the gospel and be the witness God has called us to be. And that's what these messages really are all about, both especially in the first service, but in this one as well. And you'll find that again at Cornerstone Bible Church and also ericbarger.com. So this presentation is all about current events, the one that I'm going to give now. And those of us who examine eschatology often research these things and speak up about the events that are going on and how they relate to Bible prophecy. And it's, often a misunderstood kind of a lonely ministry. You know, if you're in apologetics and also talking about prophecy and current events, there's a lot of people out there really don't want to hear about it, and they would rather just have comedy or have something else, feel-good gospel, which is usually a half gospel and not the whole gospel. But they, we're misunderstood people when we talk about these things. We're misunderstood. Pastor Kerry and I have talked about this and gotten to know him and I only met him once before as I came and preached here, but we have developed such a friendship through the telephone and his right-hand woman, Biggio, has helped a lot too, and just gotten to know both of them and really love them, and I'm glad that we have this relationship with the church. And whenever you talk about prophecy, this, Pastor, we're misunderstood. People think that we only have our, we're doom and gloom and we're down in the mouth and all that kind of stuff, but that's not true. But we're ridiculed maybe for these things. And I'm just going to call it like I see it today and talk about some things from my perspective, what I see from the research. And being off the road has given me the opportunity to not just shoot more video and do more editing and those kind of things, which is great. It's a part of the ministry. And it's a part of the ministry that I've really wanted to do more of. but it's also caused me to research. And I've been in constant research mode over the last, probably 3 weeks or so. And so this is some of what I've been doing. And I'll put another part of this series called Globalism in the Midst of Pandemic. I'll put another part out, hopefully, in just the next few days. And then a third part, and then we have some others already underway. So we're producing way down the road right now by all the new research. But really, we're talking about these things taking place in the time period just before the Lord comes. And what I mean by just before, well, I'm really not sure how long. But I know that we're in that period of time right now. So obviously, the last few weeks have brought us a lot of changes, all of us. And what I can tell you without question is that there are a group of elitists, I'll call them globalists, around the world who are right now planning to see how they can take advantage of the upheaval that's going on across our culture around the world. They have been waiting for this occasion to take place. They didn't know it, and I'm not saying they caused it, but they've been waiting for something just like what we're now experiencing to take place, that they can bring a shift in our culture and a shift in our society, maybe in our governmental structure, certainly in our economic structure. And I think it's important to enunciate clearly that God is allowing these people, the elitists, the globalists, the atheists, usually that's what they are, the agnostic or cultist, they could be all those things, or scattered through their midst, all those things. But God is allowing these events to take place. And we're watching these things, and we're a part of this, and it's very troubling to some of us. I mentioned in the first session this morning that I've gotten a lot of email the last few days because of the update I put out that deals with this material. You'll see part of that update in just a few minutes, but there are a lot of people very, very disturbed about what they see and how the globalists are taking advantage of this. But I expected that to be the case. I've been researching and tracking the actions and the ideas of people who want to bring about globalism, which would be basically found in the book of Revelation, even though they wouldn't look there to find it, in a one world government, one world economy, and one world religion, the three tiers of what will eventually be the Antichrist system. I don't think they usually would know that that's there. Maybe some might at this point, but this is what they think is best for mankind. Years ago, back in the 1990s, my books were published by a publisher, and the same publisher also published some books by a man named Gary Kaw. In fact, his first book came out through them. And Gary and I have traveled, I think we did 13 conferences together in 1993. We became fast friends and began to share notes, and I learned so much from Gary, and I'm going to encourage you, if you want to know more about globalism itself, there is not a better resource than Gary's book, En Route to Global Occupation. You see it there on the screen right now, En Route to Global Occupation. I highly recommend that. Even though it was written 3 decades ago, that book is just as relevant right now and just as timely right now as it was the day it was released. And there's very few books out there like that, very well researched. I think at one point we knew there were over 100 footnotes in one chapter of this book. So Gary knew his stuff, and he made sure he documented it. And he's still out there. He, incidentally, is Jan Markell's radio guest this weekend and again next weekend. And I'm grateful to see Gary still holding forth and doing exactly what God has called him to do. You can listen to that interview, by the way, by going to Jan's website. So I think some definitions and some background are in order that people would understand what I mean when I say globalist. I've given you just a little taste of it in talking about what the globalists are, but let me give you some definitions, and here's one. This is from Wikipedia, and this is generally from a pro-globalist point of view. When they say proponents of globalism believe in global citizenship, that is, the problems of humanity can be resolved with democratic globalism. Democratic globalism is the idea that all people matter, no matter where they live, and that universal freedom and human rights can be fostered for all mankind. Now, it sounds utopian. It sounds wonderful. The problem is if you have people trying to literally bring these things about, they become the leaders of the movement. And these people, the globalists, have known for a long time that they would be able to If they could do this, then they would be the rulers of the world. And this has been very clear in the writings of the globalists throughout the last 100 years or so. Merriam-Webster's dictionary gives a definition of globalism as this, that it is a national policy of treating the whole world as a proper sphere for political influence. Now, it's a little different twist on it. And here's another one. Globalism is a liberal authoritarian desire for a one-world view that rejects the role of sovereign nations in protecting values and encouraging productivity. So there would be no more United States of America, at least in the way that we are. Our Constitution would not matter, in other words. It would be a thing of the past. This definition goes on and says, globalism is anti-American in encouraging Americans to adopt a worldview rather than an American view. The ultimate goal of globalism is the eventual unification of humanity under a one-world government. Now, maybe that sounds very appealing to you. I'm sure it does if you've heard that over and over again and again since you were in first grade. This is the way that many people think today, that globalism is the only answer. We need to get our national sovereignty out of the way. We need to stop being patriotic to a nation or to a flag or to an idea or to a constitution and put it away. Well, I'm not ready to do that. Maybe I'm just stuck in the mud and part of the old guard, and I'll admit to both of those things when it comes to this. But I'm stuck in the mud for a reason, because I know where globalism ends up leading us. I know what happens in it. I'm not afraid of change, but this change is not the change that is going to help the planet, no matter what the globalists have tried to tell us for all of these years. Pro-globalist elitists act overtly. They're very open in their calling for world government. I remember the past leader of England calling for a world government. I remember the past leaders in Canada and elsewhere calling for a global government. I've heard people say this, people who are famous in the culture calling for a global government. And so the pro-globalist elitists who are not depending on getting elected to office to have their power, they generally act overtly in their approval of globalism. They're free agents who may not operate, or they may operate in the framework of a government, in a local government, be that a state or federal government, but they've adopted one world ideas. And here are just a few of the globalist groups that are in action out there, and we'll get to those in just a second. Next slide, actually. The pro-globalist politicians, they act covertly. They can't, here in America anyway, come right out and say, I think we need a new world order. I think we need a one world government. We've only heard that from one president that I remember anyway, off the top of my head, who said that kind of thing when he was in office, and that was the first President Bush, Bush 41. And he made that statement. He talked about it in his 1,000 Points of Light speech, which is a very new age idea. And he called for a new world order. But, of course, he wasn't saying that we had to dissolve the United States to get it. And you talk to the globalists, you read their writing, and you understand that that's what they're saying. Astute observers noticed globalist ideas in the actions of politicians, in their voting records, the things they endorse. And most noticeably, if you know what to look for, then you hear the silence about other issues. You never hear them being patriotic to the flag, patriotic to America, to who we are, and to the fact that the Founding Fathers, as I read the Constitution and I read our foundational documents, it's as close to a God-ordained document as we can find outside the Bible, in my opinion. And I haven't read every document in the world, but I do know quite a bit about the Bible, and I have read our foundational documents here too. Some of the globalist groups, I start with the United Nations because they're really the head of it all, just not because they're the United Nations. They are the most overt group in the world. The UN operates openly to subvert nationalism and autonomy, and I can say that without any doubt. And yet the United States is the largest financial contributor to the United Nations too, which I've always found a very interesting thing. They were founded in 1945 to replace the League of Nations. And when you begin to read the globalist documents, you begin to see that this was all in their plan. After World War II, they wanted a new organization to start to bring forth the dawning of a new world. Kind of sounds like the the writings of Marilyn Ferguson and some of the New Age authors that I used to read many, many years ago when I was a New Ager. But this is what the New Ages wanted to, a dawning of a new world. And they wanted to forward international law and make it most important. They wanted to create a one world order. And the United Nations typically supports very liberal ideas, liberal environmentalism, the socialist and communist ideas. And when you go back and you begin to see what they have supported through the years, you begin to understand. They're staunchly pro-abortion. They're advocates of LGBT. They are radically Marxist in favor of income equality, which sounds really good on the outside, except what that means is the people who have been creative and had ingenuity and been given drive to create, that is capitalists, they have to give up their ideas to make everything equal for everybody. And that never works for humankind. The communists have figured that out because communism doesn't work. Socialism doesn't work, even though our country seems to be trying to go that direction because the millennials have not been educated. Why? Because the education that's being given to them in our college campuses has kept them from the truth and has not told them the whole truth. And so they don't understand that communism has failed everywhere it's been tried. And socialism and communism are the same thing by a different name. They're radically Marxist at the UN. They favor the income equality, and they want to destroy the creative and productive ideas of individuals and countries, and their policies on healthcare and education are beyond leftist. Two constant themes that we see are the policies on population control and climate change, or maybe it's called global warming today, or ozone depletion as it was just 20 years ago, or maybe it was called the New Ice Age back in the 70s. In fact, that's what it was. The front of Time magazine said the new coming ice age. Well, 2018, the United Nations Human Rights Council called for making nationalist populism illegal, and cracking down on those who voice conservative and Christian beliefs. And why would they do that? This was a backlash against the election of Donald Trump. That's exactly what it was. But it showed where they're coming from. In 2019, UN Secretary General Guterres, he announced in a speech that the UN would target so-called hate speech. And I think I know what they mean by that. But perhaps the worst overt a globalist idea they have is their anti-Israel stand that emanates from the United Nations. And though the UN Human Rights Council, used to be called the Commission, by the way, is supposed to identify and publicize who the violators are of human rights, and some of the countries there, you look at it, you look at the countries that are involved. To get elected to this commission, they use their membership to conceal the human rights violations, such as genocide and crimes against humanity. And let's never forget who some of those countries are. China, Saudi Arabia, and Cuba just finished their terms on the Human Rights Council. And Libya, the Sudan, and Venezuela just started their terms. At one point a few years ago, China, Cuba, Libya, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia were all on the Human Rights Commission at one point. Now, currently, their headquarters is in New York City. You saw the picture there a minute ago. However, many of us, myself included, believe the UN should be relocated. Personally, I think it should be moved kind of east from where it is toward Europe, and I have a spot staked out, and I put together a little video day before yesterday to illustrate this. So let's watch. I think the depth there is something like 8,000 feet in the water. And that's where the UN building should be moved. That's my personal opinion about it, because of what it stands for, as I've just illustrated. So the globalists are United Nations, but there's more than that, of course. The European Union, They were ballistic behind the scenes, the globalists were, because of Brexit, because of Great Britain pulling out of the European Union. They were going to use the European Union as a model for how the world could all join together with one money system in one union. Maybe have their own government somehow for a while, but all move toward this centralized one world government. There's a lot more groups, but I'll give you a couple more examples. The World Economic Forum, that meets together in Davos, Switzerland every year. You're going to hear more about them in a few minutes, but that's definitely a globalist group. And there are other organizations that have helped plan globalism to make the New World Order take place, and you've heard of some of them. And of course, the minute I mention the Council on Foreign Relations, people think that I'm a conspiracy freak. Well, I told people in that first session this morning, I believe in conspiracies. I don't follow all of them, but if they're proven out, then I don't think we can just ignore them. In fact, I know of a conspiracy that took place just this morning. That's right, Pastor Kerry and I have been on the phone conspiring for me to come and speak to you all live streamed this week. So we had, well, it was just two of us talking about it. Would you call it a conspiracy? Well, I guess you could. We had an agreement. Well, conspiracies take place in private. Our conversations were in private. So people could call that a conspiracy of some sort, especially if they didn't like what we were doing. Well, the Council on Foreign Relations, made up of U.S. citizens, that exists. In fact, that was the idea of David Rockefeller. That exists to bring about a global government. Another one is a more international group, the Trilateral Commission. You probably heard about them. These are things that exist, no doubt about it, with very popular and very powerful people who are all centered on the idea of bringing about globalism. The Bilderberger Society, even the more clandestine of these groups. Well, this is something that Rockefeller and others have put together through the years. They meet each year in the Black Forest in Germany, and so it's not a secret that they do it, but now we know what they're doing. You see David Rockefeller, both the younger one and the elder gentleman there. And he died at 101 years of age in 2017. But he's one of the most prominent globalists of all time. In fact, it's hard to imagine anyone who's been more important to the end goal of the globalist in our modern times than David Rockefeller, who, of course, was the Chase Manhattan Bank and so on. He was the head of that bank. Another one, Zbigniew Brzezinski, passed away in 2017 as well, a Polish-American diplomat, a political scientist, and he served as a counselor to Lyndon Johnson as president and also to Jimmy Carter as his national security advisor for 4 years when Carter was president. And his organizational skills made him indispensable in the early days of the Trilateral Commission. And there he is, along with his friend Henry Kissinger. Now, this is the old guard of the globalists, and there's new ones today, but this is the old guard. Kissinger was, of course, Secretary of State and National Security Advisor under Presidents Nixon and also Gerald Ford. And really, these are the men who really have now, they're kind of out of the way, but they're now still speaking, if you will, from the grave, even though Kissinger is still living. He recently has been calling for a new world order. I will have that in an update here, our TV updates sometime pretty soon. But he's been calling for it again because there's a reason with the COVID-19 pandemic going on around us. They know they can make a move, and they, of course, are planning it. Here's David Rockefeller. This is an old quote, but he said, "We are grateful." Now, if you wonder why you haven't heard about this stuff, this may be a reason. Because they had compatriots in the media. He says, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. Now, he made that statement at the Bilderberger meeting in June of 1991, to give you an idea. He went on to say, "It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world, if we'd been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march forward toward a world government. The supernatural sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely more preferable to the national determination practiced in past centuries." In other words, we've got the money, We say we have the brains. We're a lot better than letting the people elect somebody. We're a lot better than allowing people to go to a polling place and actually elect somebody to government. Brzezinski said this, and he was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and Trilateral Commission and a trusted advisor to President Obama and others. But he said, "We cannot leap into world government in one quick step. The precondition for genuine globalization is progressive regionalization." And of course, he was a person who was making those statements on a regular basis, believing that he would be able to help the world understand what to do and how to do it. Now, it's very similar to what I wrote in the description for part 1 of my recent series that we're involved with on Take a Stand TV. You'll find that on YouTube in our YouTube channel. But I wrote about the same kind of ideas, and I wrote this just this week. For the far-left globalists, the road to the New World Order is incremental. It's not a crushing overthrow of freedom led by an army. It is baby steps, many of them. However, the COVID-19 pandemic presents opportunity and possibility for those bent on pushing their agenda and taking down America. And if you don't think that's what they're up to, this is a quote from David Rockefeller. He made this statement in the United Nations Business Council meeting back in 1994. "We are on the verge," he said, "of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the New World Order." What if David Rockefeller were alive today and in his right mind? What would he be saying now? He'd be saying, go forward. This is why Kissinger and others are suddenly once again bringing the call again to the public of a new world order is needed, that we must have a new world order. So here I think it would be beneficial if you would see what I had in my video update just a couple of days ago. And I'll pick up the information after this clip plays, but watch carefully. This will give you a good basis, and then we're going to go forward with new information that I have not had in any form, whether it be print or TV. It's all brand new stuff. Here we go. For decades, one world thinkers have repeated the talking points that patriotic nationalism and identity are failing society. Most have thought, they say, are the archaic ideas expressed in the United States Constitution. As the worldwide coronavirus catastrophe has unfolded, the globalists are again reaffirming their belief that mankind's only answer and only hope is a new world order. In this series of updates, we're going to examine both the past and present agendas of one of globalism's most influential figures, the former richest man in the world and now former CEO of Microsoft, Bill Gates. The COVID-19 outbreak presents a monumental challenge for mankind. But if Bill Gates' plan for vaccinations is adopted, a key agenda of the globalist will be fulfilled. Stay tuned as we find out what it is and why all Americans, particularly Christians, should be concerned. I'm Eric Barger, and this is Take a Stand TV, and this is Globalism in the Midst of Pandemic.
Welcome to another edition of Take a Stand TV with your host, Christian apologist, author, and speaker, Eric Barger. You can subscribe to our updates and find Eric online at ericbarger.com. Now, here's Eric Barger.
In my last update, Beyond COVID-19, How to Respond in the Days Ahead, I laid out some framework and some ideas, suggestions for us as Christians, and what we can do as we look forward beyond the COVID-19 pandemic that we're currently experiencing right now. And in that update, I stated the world is being tested and also conditioned, and the globalists are watching to see how we will respond. You know, there is no doubt that the left, the globalists, the extreme left, they are stinging right now because of the way they were defeated in 2016. Donald Trump gave them a shellacking, and they want to take ground back, the ground that they lost back in 2016. We know that for sure. They are certainly right now laying in wait for any opportunity to take advantage. And the COVID-19 pandemic is just such a crisis that they can try to use. There is certainly good reason to believe that a discussion of the globalist and Bill Gates in particular is very apropos right now, considering the coronavirus pandemic and the fact that he has been so much in the news as of late. Many years ago, Bill Gates began chanting the mantra of the New World Order. He wasn't just a face in the crowd, but his enormous wealth gave him acceptance as a key member of the elite globalist faculty. No matter what humanitarian venture Gates brings funding to, there is always a globalist endgame in play. He's a true believer and capable of making a difference toward building that promised utopian New World Order. Time and time again, Gates has called for a new world order, a one-world government, and endorsed globalist talking points, particularly in 2014 and 15. His 2015 call for equity and a cashless society to help bring it about came with claims that it would be a leveling of the playing field. Along with his wife, Melinda, the Gates 2015 annual letter included an invitation for readers to become global citizens. And you see Rod Stewart and Oprah right there with him. Gates wrote, and I quote, "But we need even more voices, and by joining Global Citizen, you can add yours. The more global citizens there are, and the more active and effective they are, the more progress the world will make. We hope you will show your support by signing up." That's in their 2015 letter. 6 months later, they reinforced the very same idea in this letter, which came out in July of 2015. Now, Gates has been active on the far left front for a long time. He's been a globalist, and of course, globalists are into gun control, they're into income equality, they want common core education, all of those kind of things. But the main thing that Gates has been into is medicine, in particular, vaccines. Now, along with the United Nations over this past decade, he's worked in conjunction with them and their agency, the World Health Organization. You've heard a lot about them just recently in the media. And they've been funding various other causes through the Gates Foundation, primarily in third world countries, and it's come out of their massive fortune, being the richest man in the world for much of that time, and now the second richest man in the world, only second to the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos. Though Gates called the UN a failure during an appeal for global government in January 2015, he realizes that though they're fraught with issues, the UN still is the only game in town, so he's got to play with them if he's going to play at all. Just this week, President Trump put a hold on funding to the WHO, or World Health Organization, because of their being complicit with the Communist China activities in trying to cover up the coronavirus and hold back all of the data and figures that certainly we could have used. And that brings me to what I really want to talk about, and that is a tabletop exercise to examine preparedness in case of global pandemic. It was held October 18th, 2019. I would say that that's pretty interesting timing, but I'll continue to read now. That was October 18th, 2019, and hosted with partners the World Economic Forum, which is a globalist enclave, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Gates has worked with Johns Hopkins numerous times and been a large contributor with them. What a coincidence this would happen, that they would have this kind of an exercise. It was a room with a huge table, about 50 or so individuals around it, and a lot of observers around them, as they would discuss if we were ready for a pandemic such as we're seeing right now. Now, why would he be talking about that just back in October? A representative from Johnson & Johnson brought forward an old standby or familiar solution during Event 201. This is that they need a centralized global economy, an authority to be in charge of funding and procuring vaccines for various nations in crisis, and that was an opinion, of course, that they thought would solve a pandemic. Again, oddly enough, this took place right before the COVID-19 pandemic took place. This was a 3.5-hour tabletop simulation. It was all about stopping a novel coronavirus. That was the crux or the object of this particular exercise. And they said it would kill millions of people worldwide. And I say again, the timing was certainly interesting, but I'm not going to push that point too much, maybe only 2 or 3 more times during this particular update. And now we skip ahead to March 24th. On March 24th, 2020, Bill Gates began to speak to an opportunity that had been provided by the coronavirus crisis. During an online TED Talk, and most of you know what that is, he addressed his vision for how the world can move ahead in light of a pandemic. He said, eventually what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person. Because you don't want people moving around the world where you'll have some countries that won't have it under control, sadly. You don't want to completely block off the ability for people to go there and come back and move around. So eventually there will be this digital immunity proof that will help facilitate the global reopening up. 6 days earlier, on March 18th, during an Ask Me Anything session on Reddit, and most of you know what that is too, Gates spoke of the same issue as he responded to a question concerning the future of commerce and maintaining social distancing. Gates stated during that Reddit Ask Me Anything session, eventually we will have some digital certificates to show who is recovered and who's been tested recently, or when we have a vaccine, who has received it. I want you to ponder the idea of digital certificates. We'll talk a little more about it today, but in my next update, we'll detail exactly what he is speaking about. Both of these events were reported on widely. You probably heard about it in the news. You can find both the TED Talk and the Reddit Ask Me Anything session with Gates across the internet. And by the way, at some point on March 31st, that last sentence of the quote that I put on the screen a minute ago that caused such red flags to fly was edited out of the TED Talk online. You won't see it, you won't hear it online, but thankfully there are recordings of it. And here it is again, that last sentence. So eventually there will be a digital immunity proof that will help facilitate the global reopening up. Tell you what, that gives me chills, and it should give them to you too. If Bill Gates didn't have the clout and hadn't spread his money around so much to gain so much favor, it would be different. But he does have the clout. That's the point. Here's that quote again. Why would they want to edit something out of Gates' talk unless it was something that later on they thought maybe should be revealed later? You know, it's good that people do record these things right off their computer when they're happening, and we do have a recording of it, and here it is.
Eventually, what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person, because you don't want people moving around the world where you'll have some countries that won't have it under control. Sadly, you don't want to completely block off the ability for those, people to go there and come back and move around. So eventually there will be sort of this digital immunity proof that, will help facilitate the global reopening up.
Yeah, I appreciate the folks at the Next News Network. I watch their stuff quite a bit, and they're the ones who put together that video that has the extra emphasis in it, and I thought that was well done, and you should see it. In the next report, I'm going to show you what Bill Gates has commissioned both MIT and Rice University engineers to do. And you'll see what happened and when it happened. And it's important you understand there is a plan at work here all along behind the coronavirus. And I'm not saying necessarily that Bill Gates loosed the coronavirus, but there are some kind of suspicious circumstances, and I think we need to look at them, and above all, if nothing else, if it's just them taking advantage of these things, I think it's apropos that we see this and understand that the globalists will do whatever they can with any situation to get control. And that's what they want. They hate the United States and they want globalism. That would put them in charge, the few at the top lording over the many at the bottom. I know it sounds just like communism. It has a whole lot of the same similarities. I'll see you for our next update, and you don't want to miss that. But if you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button and then go to ericbarger.com and subscribe to my email update newsletter. That's a way to find out what's going on in the ministry, and I'll be able to share with you when a new book or video or article, whatever it is, comes out. And of course, you can use our website, ericbarger.com. It's a treasure trove where we archive everything. Well, have a great day. In the midst of Corona, we can still let the light of Jesus shine through us. God bless you. All right, well, that's the information from the first part of the series that I put together, or I'm putting together at this moment. What was Bill Gates referring to when he said digital immunity proof? I said, consider this, ponder this. What are digital certificates? And that was the crux of what we talked about there. But first, let me answer the question of what this is all about. Well, Bill Gates himself commissioned engineers from MIT and from Rice University in December of 2019. So this is all happening right in a row. This is the digital delivery mechanism that Gates is speaking about. And a team of engineers from those two universities, and MIT is very notable, obviously, have developed a vaccine delivery system that does not utilize a standard needle and syringe, but includes a, listen, permanent on-patient decentralized medical record. So the vaccine would actually implant a medical record in every person. Now, they're saying, Gates is saying, you've got to have it to be able to travel. You have to have it to be able to meet in public. In fact, there's speculation now that you have to have proof of the vaccine to be able to go to a sporting event. This is the kind of event that honestly, David Rockefeller and others, they could never have dreamed this would take place because it is made to order. I'll say it again. They're not going to utilize a needle and syringe to put together this vaccine. But they want they will actually implant a permanent on-patient decentralized medical record deposited under the skin. When scanned, it indicates that the subject or the person has received a particular vaccine. So it could be set up for many vaccines, but it's, of course, COVID-19 that he's talking about. And this is why he went out of his way to pay for this research and development. And they have developed a way to do this now. And the technology is out there. It's also called a human implantable quantum dot tattoo. That is the way you may see it publicized. The MIT News, their newsletter or small magazine on their campus, reported December 18, 2019, that the microneedles are made from a mixture of dissolvable sugar and a polymer called PVA, as well as a quantum dot dye and the vaccine. And when the patch is applied to the skin, as in the middle drawing here that you see, I'll click there so you can see it, the microneedles, which are about 1.5 millimeters long, partially dissolve, releasing their payload of vaccine within 2 minutes. But they don't stop there. By selectively loading microparticles into the microneedles, the patches deliver a pattern in the skin that is invisible to the naked eye. So the patch literally dissolves into the skin, as depicted here in this last drawing, but can be scanned by a smartphone with the infrared filter removed. So with a smartphone, you can see if somebody has the patch, and thus which vaccine they had, in this case, COVID-19. And the patch can be customized to imprint different patterns that correspond with different vaccines. The research, and this I'm quoting again now, the researchers showed that their new dye can remain for at least 5 years under the skin, where it emits near-infrared light that can be detected by a specially equipped smartphone. Specially equipped smartphone. Now, I've known about this kind of technology for quite some time. I didn't know it was advanced like this. I talk about it in the documentary Home Invasion. You're seeing the logo for Home Invasion there. It's a little plug for the video for the documentary, because it will be coming out at some point, hopefully before the rapture, hopefully before well, actually the rapture could happen now and I'd be fine. How about you? But hopefully before I go to heaven, that we'll get that done and get it out to folks. I knew about this because Dr. Todd Coleman has talked about it, and this picture appears in my documentary Home Invasion, about the technology of the day we're in. And this slide actually appears in that Home Invasion video, and Dr. Coleman is from the University of California at San Diego, and he's developed tattoos capable of containing and transmitting medical information. Transmitting medical information. A tattoo that has your medical information in it. Could be on your leg, anywhere. And this also would have the current condition of the patient, brain waves, heart rate, and other signs attached to it. And these photos are from Dr. Coleman's TED Talk back in 2015. He's a brilliant man, by the way. Many of us who research and speak on prophetic issues have spoken out about the Orwellian nature of these technologies. But in many instances, Bill Gates can really get away with doing whatever he wants to do because he has paid for that privilege. You see, these things have to do with prophecy. If you all think this is just about politics or this is somehow just against Bill Gates, I have no reason to be against a person. But it's what they're doing and what it means to us, especially if it has prophetic implications and overtones. And this has a lot of that. Now, you probably guessed the punchline by now that Bill Gates is the one who paid for MIT and Rice University researchers to develop the vaccine patch that implants a permanent digital certificate in each recipient. It came from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That's where the funding came from. And this is why Gates is repeating the narrative, and he's been saying this all through the media, and you probably have seen it at some point. This is why he's repeating the narrative that before business and commerce can once again start in the post-pandemic world, that digital immunity proof would be needed to verify who has and who has not been vaccinated or become immune to COVID-19. Now, this picture kind of says it all to me. What gives Bill Gates the right to call all the shots on digital vaccines and a digital ID? The answer is money and reputation. He is the point man in the view of the media. And you know, the media really does control a whole lot of this. If they promote something or if they say something is good, they push it. Some people buy what they say, and a lot of people, of course, go along if they have the same political bent as the bulk of the media. Politico, where this picture came from, tagged Bill Gates the world's most powerful doctor. And he is second only to the United States as the largest contributor to the World Health Organization. Bill Gates holds incredible clout, and you can't miss that, can't discount it. There can be no doubt that Bill Gates, with the help of the media, is positioning himself to be the point man on the COVID-19 vaccine, and that ought to concern every one of us. The result of his open checkbook is really not hard to discern. Bill Gates is treated like a head of state in many places, perhaps even more importantly than some heads of state, because of his willingness to fund causes, especially in vaccines over the last 10 to 12 years. Gates gives huge sums of money to many so-called and well-known groups and organizations, as well as obscure medical causes, and it's hard to estimate the kind of power that he wields because of this. The foundation, the money from his foundation also went to the Purebright Institute, which is an English research group that, are you ready, owns the patent on other strains of the coronavirus. And he's the one funding it. In fact, we talked about Event 201. Did you know that in that supposed, and I'm going to say it was supposed, in that pandemic exercise back in October 2019, the coronavirus that was named in this large 3.5-hour role-playing event amongst these officials was the very same name as the original name given to the COVID-19 coronavirus. Only in January was the name changed to COVID-19. They gave it the same name as the original name. And so you look at these things and you wonder, how is this taking place in plain view? Well, in March, Bill Gates he donated $100 million to help with the COVID-19 response. And we say, oh, isn't that a wonderful thing? And there in April 16th, he gave another $150 million. And this was a slap against President Trump, because Bill Gates is very upset that Trump pulled the federal funding from the World Health Organization, because Bill Gates is second only to the United States in donations to the World Health Organization. He is a trusted voice amongst those on the left who are in the medical community, that's for sure. Well, you think about the kind of promise that Bill Gates has given. He's positioning himself to be a trusted voice about all of this. UPI reported on Friday, April 10th, that he was going to help South Korea to fight COVID-19, and he contributed $30 million toward their seeking or searching for a vaccine. And there are 80 different groups looking for a vaccine now. It's of course something the world needs, but you have to understand, when you look at it from a financial end, you begin to understand what's going on. And the Gates Foundation has given so many grants through the years that it'd be a full-time job to try to track each one. It was mind-boggling for me just to ferret out some of the information on this. But I felt, because it's prophetic, these things are prophetic, that we needed to include it in the updates. And all of this will be in my second update. And I've left out a lot of slides. I had to decide what I was going to do to slim all this down. And I don't have the second and third parts of my video updates all ready yet, and they're not all lined up and not recorded yet, but there's so much material, it's hard to know what to include and what not. But estimates vary about the amount of money that the Gates Foundation has given. UPI reported that the Gates had donated $6.6 billion to global health programs. Laura Ingraham said on her program, her TV program, April 15th, that Gates had donated $3.6 billion to the WHO, the World Health Organization, alone. And remember, they're the ones that were in cahoots with the Chinese not to let the world know how bad it was. And it could be that because China held back the information and the WHO had their back, that we don't have the information, we didn't have the information to be able to fight it in time, is the problem. And the Chronicle of Philanthropy said that Gates has given a total of, are you ready, $45.5 billion to various organizations and foundations out there, dating back to 1994. A total in 2019 was $589 million given away by the Gates Foundation. Now, you have to understand, though, you might think that some of that went to really help people, and I'm sure some, in a way, did. A lot of this is, I'll just say it, influence peddling is what it comes down to. You put enough money out there, you get favor. He's on the board of Gavi, and the Gavi Alliance is really the alliance for vaccines and immunizations. And he is one of the permanent board members. You see at the very bottom of that circle, you see the Gates Foundation, along with UNICEF and the World Bank and the World Health Organization. Another very important UN organization is the World Bank. And Gates donated $4 billion to Gavi, and they are the ones who control the vaccines in the planet. 1 out of every $10 donated to the World Health Organization came from Bill and Melinda Gates and their foundation. What does that get you? It gets you great favor. And Gates desired to have the coronavirus be declared a pandemic by the WHO, and the WHO had failed on this. They had decided not to have it declared a pandemic. Gates lobbied them openly to have it declared a pandemic. And according to Cheryl Chumley, who's a writer for the Washington Times, on March 11th, one day after Bill Gates promised $50 million to the WHO fund for their therapeutic accelerator, which is a program to be able to decide what is the best way to attack COVID-19, one day after he gave the money, Dr. Tedros, who we now know is the guy who is backing China and holding information back from the world that would make China look bad, well, Dr. Tedros proclaimed and declared the outbreak of COVID-19 to be a pandemic, one day after $50 million came from the Gates checkbook. This is unheralded influence when you think about it. You look at the facts and figures, you look at the documentation, you begin to see these things are the way that business is being done. Cheryl Chumley also questions how much money is being made behind the scenes, and rightfully so. She had many, many articles on this at the Washington Times. And I wonder if the eventual COVID-19 vaccine will be chosen because it's absolutely the best answer, or maybe because of financial considerations. And one point you should know, there has never been a successful vaccine that's ever been put together, that's ever been developed for any coronavirus. And there are several coronaviruses. MERS and SARS were both coronaviruses, but there's never been a successful vaccination. And people are working on it like crazy today because they know how much money could be made, as well as, of course, they want to, I believe people really do want to help the world to recover from this. You take a look at the Gates, they donated $20 million, the Gates Foundation did, just to give out as grants from the Therapeutic Accelerator. They're also examining whether hydroxychloroquine is a good preventative, and certainly in the early stages of COVID-19, whether it should be given out or not. Now, I guarantee you that the people making vaccines do not want hydroxychloroquine and Z-Pak, that's the antibiotic, to be suggested that it's a good thing for people, because it doesn't mean money. Those are old drugs, and they don't want old drugs. They want new drugs that, of course, much more is charged for. And they want this vaccine to be something that they can use now, but will have a long-lasting financial effect. Bill Gates wants it for another reason. He wants to make sure everybody has that patch because it has a digital ID, and he's pushing for every person in the world to be marked somehow with a digital ID for every person. He's working on some countries right now, and he'd love to have it happen here mandatorily because he knows Americans aren't going to buy into this. Now, I say this because of the vicious and unsubstantiated attacks that hydroxychloroquine has gotten in the media. Have you noticed that? That tells you a lot when you see the media go after something the way they've gone after hydroxychloroquine. When I hear the media talk about, I'm talking about CNN and NBC and ABC, when you hear them talk about these things, it tells you somebody behind the scene is pushing a particular narrative. Now, when President Trump suggests that hydroxychloroquine could be something that might be viable, and you hear patients, especially if you watch the Fox network, they have testimonies of people. There are people out there saying that I took this, I was dying and I took this and I recovered and I'm out of the hospital and I'm free of COVID-19. What's wrong with that? Nothing. But this is not a new drug. And I kind of thought this might be the way it's gone, and it certainly has been the way this has gone. Now, Bill and Melinda Gates, they went from back in the 1990s going from a third world birth control initiative that they put together to now bankrolling and patenting viruses and vaccines that allegedly can prevent the populace from dying, and then in effect, maybe the vaccines are doing the same thing. But can I just add this, and this is an aside, and I'll get into this more on TV. Bill Gates' dad was the head of Planned Parenthood. And that should speak loud and clear to us as Christians. That is not exactly a family-friendly group, if you know what I'm saying. Now, while I'm off exploring in this rough terrain, how did Bill Gates come to believe this? Well, Bill Gates said he thinks a coming disease could kill 30 million people in 6 months. He said that when? April 27, 2018, to the Business Insider. By the way, Business Insider, European magazine, is a globalist magazine. But he said it could kill 30 million people. How would he know that? How could he make these statements? The answer is the globalists are masters at signaling one another of what they intend. I'll just leave it there. I can't prove anything. I can't say anything with any consequence about Gates involved. I'm just saying that something is going on for all these events, and I'm going to show you a list of events in just a second. You see, there's another reason why he'd love to have the patch and the implant, because he's been working on an initiative with the UN that everybody in the world would have this ID. And so this is something that's just not come up recently. This is something he's been involved with. ID 2020, they wanted to do it by this year. They had a summit in September of last year at the UN headquarters. Microsoft would be the company that would keep track of all the people in the world and their digital IDs. Does this make sense? There's a lot of conflicts of interest going on here. Now, Gates has stepped down from Microsoft. Maybe there's more reason about that, of why that's taken place. I'm just drawing this together, and I'll have more documentation in our next two updates that I'll do online as well. So, let's come to the end of this, and as I close, I want to mention that this morning I've omitted so many slides in research. I've talked about in those slides many of the other things that have gone on behind the scenes. For example, how many lawsuits are now pending in India? And yesterday I talked to a friend of mine on the phone who goes to India often and has gone there on mission trips and supports a church by himself in India. And so as soon as I mentioned Bill Gates, he said, do you know how many people are suing the Gates Foundation because of the vaccines that they have used on people as human guinea pigs and how many people have died from them? I said, oh, I'm well aware. I'm well aware. I've been researching this now for a couple of weeks, and I'd never been into this before. I kind of skirted around talking about any of this stuff or really researching this. But as I continue working on the home invasion documentary in my spare time, that's a joke, by the way, I'll be completing parts 2 and 3 pretty quick. And if you don't receive our email updates, again, I hope you'll go and get those. Now, will there be a government-mandated digital certificate to identify people who are corona safe? Will that happen? Well, Gates isn't the only one who's working on this kind of stuff. That's for sure. But Rush Limbaugh questioned this about 2 weeks ago now, 2 weeks ago tomorrow, actually. Limbaugh said that, in fact, World Net Daily said that Limbaugh said on his radio show, the talk radio host, Rush Limbaugh, is warning Americans of the possibility of your papers, please, travel checkpoints in the United States as part of the recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. Now, Rush Limbaugh doesn't say stuff like this very often, but he was very alarmed that day. I went back and listened to the recording. He's particularly concerned that Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, has floated a plan for immunity cards, a little different than the patch, but cards you would carry in your pocket to identify if you had the virus and are now immune, or you've had the vaccine, if and when the vaccine comes out. So Rush was talking about this on radio. And you have to ask again, would Americans push back to this? Would we push back? We wouldn't push back nearly as much on this if it had been sprung on us out of the blue. But now there's an understanding of why people may be saying this, why Bill Gates has been saying. You heard him say it there in the clip we played a few minutes ago. And so you understand they're stretching their boundaries, and this is all helping to move the push for world government along the pike. There are already immigration checkpoints across the Southwest, and if you've ever traveled in West Texas and in New Mexico and in Arizona, then you've seen those quite a ways north of the Mexican border, but that's to look for illegals that have come in the country. Well, now they're talking about doing this elsewhere, and the chances are there wouldn't be the kind of pushback against this as there might be in some other ways. There's a genuine fear about contracting the virus. I've said that openly. I talked about it, especially in the first session this morning. The amount of pushback would be lessened because some people could likely become convinced that such a global or a digital identifier was for their own good. And as a person that travels, especially traveling across international borders, as I do, the globalists and their lapdogs would undoubtedly attempt to paint resistors in the worst light possible. If we resist this, we'll be fanatics. We'll be radicals. We'll be called Christians, Pastor. That's what a lot of people would say. It's those Christians, those resistors that are stopping this. And why we do that? Because we see something else in this that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So if Gates' plan for a COVID-19 vaccination, including a digital certificate for every person, was somehow implemented, and I don't know how, then the checkpoints would be in airports and highways, entering cities and towns. They could be everywhere. And they would probably consist of a person waving an equipped cell phone at people's arms where they say they got the vaccination to see if they really did, to allow them to come in or allow them to get on the flight. You can kind of imagine that same kind of thing happening. This reminds you a lot of the Nazis. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. And by the way, this is a nice, tidy, single identifier for authorities to say that you've had this, because you could always say, I lost my card if they gave you a digital immunity card. China has already embarked on this kind of tracking system, being a cashless society, and they're using cell phones because every Chinese person has a cell phone. Google and Apple are now talking about how they can have an identifier as well. But Bill Gates is suggesting a mandatory vaccine. And it just so happens it also has a way to put a digital identifier in your body. Cards and checkpoints would be breathtaking, even if there was a supposed reason for such operations. But just imagine what George Orwell would say if he could see Americans lining up for a government-mandated vaccine complete with a permanent ID chip in their arm. And I know many of you watching are thinking about a passage in Revelation 13, so we might as well talk about it. Revelation 13 sounds just like this, and let's read this in the context of what we're now seeing go on around us. And he causeth all, that he is Antichrist, by the way. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. Not on, it's in. Remember that. The next part of the passage, the next verse says, verse 17, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So, could I be talking about the mark of the beast here? Well, let me just come out and ask the question. Could Bill Gates be the Antichrist? I don't think so. Maybe. But I don't think we can say that. And that's not what this is all about, but I know you're thinking it. So that's why I'm bringing this up. Any prediction that anybody is the Antichrist is very risky business for anybody, and it's going to destroy credibility. It's very hard to pin down. A lot of things have to happen, and many things don't line up with Bill Gates. But these things are all precursors. This is part of the desensitization process toward that system. And that, to me, is the point here. Prophetic observers would look and see what's his national status. Well, Bill Gates is English and German and Irish, Scot-Irish. And so I'm not sure that lines up. But a lot of things would have to come into focus well better than they are now, as you saw how veiled in the background the Antichrist figure was I had on that slide, before we could ever declare that about anybody. But still remains is the main point here is that I don't plan on seeing the Antichrist, and I hope you don't either. I'm looking actually for Jesus Christ, and I hope you are. I'm not looking for Antichrist. I may have some ideas. I might see things happen that concern me, that tell me that that could be the person. We often talk about a figure that's alive in the world today that lives in Rome as possibly being the false prophet. But I'm looking for Jesus. That's the point. I'm looking for Jesus. But there's still one more question to be answered here as we close. Is Gates' plan for vaccination and the chip for each American, maybe everybody worldwide, is that the mark of the beast? And I say no. No. But it is part of the conditioning process to get people ready. Actually, I don't think a lot of people would really be thinking about that being a viability. They wouldn't want something like that were it not for the fact that they've gone to the tattoo parlor so many times, because that's been part of a desensitization, a conditioning process that I've been talking about for a long time as part of the way, part of the road toward the mark of the beast. But there are similarities in what Gates is suggesting here. When Bill Gates says that we can't be allowed to just fly around, and he's saying, what he's really saying is you can't buy or sell without a digital certificate, just like Revelation chapter 13. When he says Americans can't be opened up for business without a vaccine, he's really saying you can't buy or sell without it. And if we don't see it and understand it like that, then we really missed the point, and we really haven't studied prophecy very much if we don't understand that's what's being told to us right now, and that decision may be ahead of us, and I don't know that for sure, but I think so. See, in this case, lives are not being threatened, but Bill Gates is intimating that people should not be allowed to resume commerce or travel, and travel is a way that many people conduct business. It's a way that, if you want to call what I do business, it's a way I conduct business. And unless I can prove I've had the virus or I've had the vaccine and I'm immune from it, I may not be able to enter some countries. Now, if you haven't heard about this proposal and plan, I know how unsettling it was the first time I read about this and then began to research it about a month ago. And it was very, very unsettling to me when I first saw it. So I know how you might feel right now. But once these troubling thoughts subside, remember, we are in a battle for our nation. And our nation has been the standard bearer of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We have been the thunder of evangelistic prospects around the world for many years. And so it's important that our nation remain the nation and remain strong. See, this situation, as evil as it is, presents a wonderful opportunity for us who are aware of globalism to use what Bill Gates is saying as a teaching tool to help alert other people, our friends, our family, our co-workers, about the insidious nature of the globalist mindset and be able to introduce them to what the Scripture says. And after all that I presented today, I have some good news for you. I have good news. We have a president who's going to stand against this. I almost queued up a clip of President Trump at the UN last year declaring the future is not for the globalists. They hate him. He is standing completely against their cause in a way that no other president ever has. But our Attorney General also believes in the Constitution, and Bill Barr, he's to the rescue. Here he comes to the rescue. Again, he's saying that it will not pass the muster of the Constitution to make every person have a vaccine. And so that's good news as long as we have people in place in Washington who will stand by the Constitution and not bend to it, not give in to the wants of the globalists. He's standing against it, and said so on Laura Ingram's show here back. I'm trying to remember what day it was, and I had it queued up, but I'm not going to try to play it. But just in the last couple of weeks, he told Laura Ingraham it would be a real problem for that kind of thing to be brought in. Let me tell you 8 things that make me ponder, and I'm going to give you this as I close. And there are so many nuances and sidebars to this entire story. I could fill up a lot of time and maybe an entire message or maybe an entire TV update by talking about it. Let me give you just these 8 things that make me ponder. Here we go. Number 1, 2015, Gates gave a TED Talk warning of a coming pandemic. 2018, I showed you the article a while ago in this presentation, Business Insider interview, he repeated the same thing, a pandemic's coming to kill 30 million people, he said. October of 2019, Gates funded the event 2001. He was the funder of this event, this tabletop exercise about pandemic readiness in New York, where they used the very same name of the COVID-19 virus before it was changed to COVID-19. December of 2019, he commissioned MIT and Rice University engineers to complete the vaccine delivery system and give a permanent ID with it. In March of this year, Gates abruptly resigns from Microsoft and Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's company. He resigned from their boards, and the perspective in the news media has been he's going to be the coronavirus vaccine czar. In March 18th of 2020, he gave a Reddit Ask Me Anything, where he first made the digital certificate statement. March 24th, a week later, he referred to digital immunity proof in his TED Talk. And lastly, he now insists, along with Dr. Fauci, that the U.S. cannot open for business until this pandemic is completely over or a vaccine is ready. And I'll be talking about both the doctors that have been advising the president, and the president was stuck with them. They've been there a long time. Dr. Fauci's been there for five presidencies, 5 administrations, and he is obviously in deep state, even though he holds his head. When Trump says deep state, Dr. Fauci's in the deep state. There's a picture of Gates and Dr. Fauci together because they worked on vaccines several times. In fact, we know for a fact that the particular company that Gates has picked out, Fauci has given the right to go ahead and give humans the COVID-19 vaccine without any animal trials. That ought to frighten you all. It's the same thing they did in India, and that should frighten all of us. Folks, the globalists are not in control. Oh, it may appear that in a skirmish or a battle we are losing our way. But the globalists really aren't in control. They don't understand it. But if anybody ought to understand it, it's the audience watching today. That you're Christians. You believe the Bible. So the globalists are not in control. God is in control, not the globalist. Psalm 91 tells us, "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." That passage has meant so much to me so many times in my life. "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust." The next verse says, "Because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, thy habitation. There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling." Take that as a promise from God. Verse 8 says, if I can go on to it here. Come on, move on, folks. Well, I suppose I have verse 8 and 9 right there. But that whole passage in Psalm 91 is such a great passage, and I hope you'll go and take that as a promise from God to you about your life and about what is happening in our world, no matter how desperate it might look and how remorseful it is to watch what is happening around us. God is still on the throne, and He's going to walk with us through everything that's happened. Father, I thank you and praise you, Lord, for those who have watched today. I thank you those who have stuck with us through the entire presentation. And I'm grateful, Father, for the opportunity to come. I ask you to bless this church, Pastor Carey, and those who lead this church, that you would continue to bless them and help them in these days. They have courage to speak up on these issues, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to be part of that with them, Lord. We're just grateful now and thankful in Jesus' name.